My name is Risley Lesko, and this is my bio-expo project on concussions and a possible concussion prevention technique. Concussions in sports such as football and boxing are topics of much debate right now, as the effects of hits occurred long ago can cause symptoms 20 years later. The objective nature of concussion symptoms cause them to be very difficult to diagnose in athletes, especially if they have the desire to re-enter their respective sport. There are many myths about concussions circulating, and athletes are often hesitant to report if he or she thinks they may have a concussion due to the long recovery phase for an injury that does not show many physical symptoms. Concussions are the most common type of traumatic brain injury. They have a variety of possible signs such as headache, cognitive impairment, emotional mood swings, physical signs such as loss of consciousness or amnesia, behavioral changes, or cognitive impairments such as slowed reaction times or sleep disturbances. A 2010 Pediatrics Review article regarding sports-related concussions in both children and adolescents noted that fewer than 10% of sports-related concussions had the symptom of loss of consciousness. No single definition of concussion is universally accepted, though a variety of definitions have been offered. In 2001, the International Olympic Committee Medical Commission and other sports federations organized the first international symposium on concussion in sport. A group of experts called the Concussion in Sport Group met there and defined concussion as, quote, a complex pathophysiological process affecting the brain induced by traumatic biomechanical forces. Basically, they decided that concussions were brain trauma. Historically, by definition, concussions involved a loss of consciousness. However, the definition of concussion has evolved over time to include a change in consciousness such as amnesia or other symptoms. The most prominent head injury grading scales count concussions where loss of consciousness does not occur mild, while those with loss of consciousness severe. In 80 to 90% of concussions, the symptoms only last 7 to 10 days, not counting concussions that occur in children and adolescents, who may take longer to recover. At least 41 systems exist to measure the severity or grade of a mild head injury, and there is much disagreement amongst professionals about which is the best. Several of the systems use loss of consciousness and amnesia as the primary determinants of the severity of the concussion. Recent studies suggest a much more violent explanation for concussions and their symptoms as a result. When your head is traveling at a constant rate, so is your brain. Concussions occur when your head stops moving but your brain doesn't, smashing your brain against the interior of your skull. The symptoms that occur are actually swelling in your brain as a result of the blow it took. The new, far more violent definition of concussions lead parents and researchers to be wary of sports such as football, hockey, boxing, and other contact sports where head injury is common. One of the more frightening aspects of concussions are the long-term effects multiple concussions may have. These possible effects are still largely unknown, and the consequences seem frightening. Just recently, a famous NFL linebacker named Junior Seau committed suicide and cited brain injury as one of his reasons. Researchers at Boston University found signs of a brain disease called chronic traumatic encephalopathy in more than 30 professional football players when their brains were analyzed posthumously. The consequences of CTE are largely unknown, but it has been linked to increased depression and decreased cognitive ability. Concussions can damage the brain's white matter, which is tissue that forms cables in the brain and allows different regions to communicate. In this new study at Boston University, researchers found they could predict which players had depression by examining images of their brain's white matter. Recent studies have shown that supposed mild concussions sustained by children can cause changes in white matter still visible 3 months later. This new research drastically differs from the current accepted concussion return-to-play protocol for children, as the current system calls for a much quicker return-to-play policy, potentially causing further difficulties in the child's brain. So far, it is not clear how many concussions a player would need to suffer to be at risk for impaired thinking and mood problems. Also, there is no known reason why some athletes experience these symptoms after multiple concussions, while some do not. Here to comment on attitudes on concussions in professional sports, NFL Seahawk long snapper Clint Gresham. So, Clint, how much was head injury awareness stressful while you're playing high school and college football?
When I was in high school, nobody ever talked about it. I never saw anybody that sustained any major head injuries. In college, I'd say it was the same thing. It wasn't ever talked about. I mean, whenever you would hit somebody, it was one of those things where you'd say, I just got my bell rung, and you'd keep playing. And the nature of concussions is that it's one of those things that you can hide pretty easily, unless it's really, really bad. So when I was in high school and college, it was not something that was on the forefront of people's minds like it is today.
Right, and then so how do you think attitudes have changed, and how has concussion prevention and head trauma safety been stressed as you've been in the pros?
Yeah, man. I mean, it's completely changed. The NFL is obviously trying to do everything they can about awareness and trying to protect the players. And because, obviously, like with issues like Junior Seau, a guy who played for years and years and years, he got his head beat around a lot.
Yeah.
And so, there's all sorts of things they're doing. There's classes that guys have to take, and obviously all these different rules that have been put in place, which have been challenging for players to adapt to. Like I heard this year that they made a rule where running backs, they can't lower their head when they're going into the line of scrimmage, which, how do you teach a guy who's been doing this for 20 years, okay, you're no longer going to lower your head.
Right.
So it's all trying to improve the game, make the game safer, help these guys who, their life expectancy, like the average life expectancy of an NFL football player is 55 years old.
Right.
Like, that's insane.
Yeah, that's good.
And so much of that goes back to all of the head trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And, guys getting Alzheimer's and all kinds of stuff like that. There was that one guy, and he played for the Saints. He played at Washington State. Gleason,
right, yeah.
Yeah, so that guy ends up getting Lou Gehrig's disease.
Right.
Well, Lou Gehrig's disease can be traced back to concussions.
Right.
So I think with stuff like that, and then stuff like Junior Seau, it's definitely more on the minds of players and definitely the public.
Sweet. So have you ever personally sustained a concussion, and if so, did you report it, and how many of you had?
I don't know if I've ever had a documented concussion.
Mm-hmm.
Looking back, I'm sure I've gotten several.
Right, yeah.
I remember getting hit in high school, and I was playing quarterback, and I whacked my head on the ground, and I get up, and my vision's completely blurry. I can't see straight.
Right.
But it's funny, like the mentality, especially growing up in South Texas, and Texas football is such a big deal.
Right.
You tough it out, and you show no weakness, and all that macho bravado stuff that, in the long run, gets people killed.
Yeah.
So, there was that element, or that time in high school, other times that I've been hit pretty hard, but never reported it or anything like that.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, especially in the NFL, that's how it is. A guy gets hit, your job's on the line. If they put somebody else in there and that person starts doing well, guys are afraid of losing their jobs, so they hide it.
Right.
And I knew a guy who is no longer playing anymore, but he played for 10 years, and he had 33 concussions in 10 years. And it's like, geez, how do you even function anymore? What the heck? But he told me stories about how he'd be walking to the bathroom and he'd black out and fall on the ground because his brain was just so jacked up.
Right.
And they do a CAT scan of his brain. His brain looks like a 70-year-old man.
Yeah.
Because he's been hit so many times.
Mm-hmm.
So going back to your other question, the issue of concussions has become a much bigger deal. And they're doing everything they can to try and protect the players and protect the image of the game.
Right. And so do you feel now in the NFL that the best interests of the players are taken into account when teams deal with a head injury?
Yeah. I would say so. I
Mhm.
mean, the game is all about the players.